The chain was yellow. That was the first thing I noticed. A bright plastic-coated chain across the mouth of my own dirt road, the road my father graded with his own tractor in 1971. Above it, a sign on two new metal posts. Whitestone Ridge Wellness Resort. Members only. Trespassers will be prosecuted. A red ribbon ran across the entrance, like it was a grand opening. It was a grand opening. A man in a black polo stepped out of a guardhouse that had not existed 6 months ago. He walked up to my window with one hand on his belt. "Sir, this is HOA property. Back this truck out now." HOA property. I almost laughed. I'd carried the recorded deed to that ground for 22 years, and I was wearing the same canvas jacket I'd worn for 9 of them. I looked like nobody. That was the point of the jacket. "This is my land," I said. He smiled the way you smile at a confused old man. Then he raised the radio on his shoulder. "Miss Cordell, we have a trespasser at the south gate, possibly intoxicated. Please advise." I wasn't intoxicated. I was 58, wearing the same canvas jacket I'd worn for 9 years, sitting in a 2009 pickup with a dent in the tailgate. I looked like nobody. That was the point of the jacket. 2 minutes later, Patricia Cordell came down the drive in a white sundress and white sandals, flanked by 3 board members and an off-duty deputy in uniform. Behind them, maybe 60 residents in pastel button-downs and summer hats stood on the freshly poured patio with champagne flutes, watching me like I was the entertainment portion of the ribbon cutting. Patricia stopped 6 feet from my driver's side door. She didn't ask my name. She didn't ask anything. "Sir," she said, loud enough for the patio to hear, "this is HOA property. We've been planning this resort for 3 years. You are trespassing on private community land. Leave now, or we file charges." She said it the way you read someone a verdict. I got out of the truck slowly. I'm a big man, but I move slow on purpose. The deputy shifted his weight. Patricia did not move at all. I walked past her to the chain and looked down the new drive. There, about 120 feet in, on what had been the highest point of my parcel, was a swimming pool, kidney-shaped, imported tile, steam rising off the water in the morning cool. It was sitting on the exact spot where the 80-year-old white oak my father had planted in 1965 used to stand. The oak my father carved his initials into. The oak we'd had a state forester verify the age of on my 40th birthday. The oak I had walked to every July 6th for 22 years on the morning of his birthday, because that was the deal I had made with myself. The oak was gone. There was a pool where the oak had been. Somewhere on the patio, a woman raised her phone and started filming. Patricia stepped up beside me and lowered her voice, but not enough that the patio couldn't hear. "I don't know who you think you are, sir, but this parcel was absorbed into common ground over 2 years ago. Our consultant verified the title. If you have a problem, you can take it up with our attorney. Officer," she nodded to the deputy, "please escort this gentleman off the property." Our consultant verified the title. I almost smiled. I didn't, because smiling would have been the wrong move in front of that crowd. But inside my chest, I felt something old and patient finally sit up. The deputy walked toward me, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. He was young. He knew what a yellow chain across a private easement looked like, even if Patricia didn't. "Sir," he said quietly, "can we just step back to your vehicle? Please." "Yes," I said, "we can." I walked back to my truck. I did not look at Patricia. I did not look at the patio. I did not look at the spot where my father's oak used to be. I climbed in, started the engine, put it in reverse, and backed out of my own driveway, slowly enough that every single person on that patio had time to memorize the dent in my tailgate. Patricia called something after me as I went. I didn't catch the words. I caught the laugh. She had no idea the trespasser she'd just had escorted off was the man who'd carried the recorded deed to that ground for 22 years. She had no idea I'd spent 3 decades practicing the exact branch of law she had just stepped into. And she had no idea that by the end of summer, every dollar she had spent on that ribbon, that pool, and every key card behind that gate was going to be mine. I drove a 1/4 mile up the county road and pulled over onto the gravel shoulder where the trees screened me from the resort. My hands were steady. I noticed that with mild interest. 22 years ago, when my father died and left me this ground, my hands had not been steady. They were steady now. I leaned across the cab and opened the glove compartment. Inside was a yellowed manila folder I had not opened in a long time. I opened it now. On top, a stamped boundary survey from October 1971, the surveyor's seal still crisp. Underneath, a clean recorded copy of the deed, my name on it since 2002, my father's name on it from 1971 to 2002, the chain unbroken. Underneath that, 11 green certified mail return receipt cards, each one stapled to a copy of the letter it had accompanied, each one signed in the same loopy hand. Patricia Cordell, Patricia Cordell, Patricia Cordell. 11 times. I closed the folder. I put it back in the glove compartment. I sat in the truck and watched a cardinal land on the wire fence next to me and listened to the faint sound of champagne glasses clinking a quarter-mile behind me through the trees. I didn't drive home angry. I drove home counting because I already knew exactly how much that ribbon, that pool, and every key card behind that gate was going to be worth. To me, I want to back up. Not to the chain across my road, further than that. To the reason that ground was mine in the first place, and to the reason it had stayed wooded for 22 years, while a subdivision rose up on the far side of the fence line. My father bought the 47 acres in the fall of 1971. He paid cash. He was a quiet man who didn't trust banks and didn't trust pretty land deals, so he hired a surveyor named Earl Whitaker out of the county seat to walk every property line with him before he signed anything. Earl drove the stakes. Earl stamped the survey. That stamped 1971 survey, the one sitting in the manila folder in my glove compartment, was the same piece of paper a state-licensed surveyor named Earl Whitaker had handed my father across the hood of a Ford pickup the year I was born. My father planted that white oak in 1965 when he was still leasing the ground. He kept planting after he bought it. He never built on it. He used to say, "Land doesn't ask for company, it just asks you not to forget it." He paid the property taxes every November until he died in 2002. I inherited it clean. No mortgage, no lien, no co-owner, no shared driveway, no shared utility. I had the deed recorded at the county clerk's office the week of the funeral. I have paid the property taxes every November since. That's 22 consecutive years of tax bills in my name, which is going to matter later. I'll get to that. I let the woods stay woods. I walked the parcel every July 6th, my father's birthday, and otherwise I left it alone. Some years I checked the southwest fence line. Some years I cut a fallen limb off the access road. That was the extent of it. To anyone driving past on the county road, my 47 acres looked like nothing. Trees. A dirt drive bending into the trees. No mailbox, no house, no sign. Across the southern fence line of my parcel, a developer had carved out 148 residential lots in 1994 and called the subdivision Whitestone Ridge. The neighborhood had its own community pool, its own clubhouse, its own HOA, its own dues. I had nothing to do with any of it. My ground had never been part of the platted subdivision. The line was on the county map. The line was on every recorded plat. The line was on my deed. The line was also, apparently, invisible to Patricia Cordell. Patricia and her husband bought a 4-bedroom on Lot 41 in 2011. Within a year, she was on the HOA Architectural Committee. By 2014, she was the secretary. By 2016, she was the president. She got re-elected 3 more times by acclamation because nobody wanted to run against her, because Patricia was the kind of woman who would file a complaint against your mailbox if you crossed her at the Christmas party. She had been in public relations before she retired. She knew how to make a room agree with her. In late 2018, at a regular HOA meeting, she stood up and said the woods on the south side of the subdivision were unused common ground, and that the board should look into developing them. There was no minute taken of where she got that idea. There is no minute taken of anybody on the board asking her, out loud, who owned the parcel. I know this because I have read every single page of the HOA's meeting minutes from 2018 through 2024. I read them later. I read them after Helen got me a copy of every set the secretary had ever uploaded to the community portal. We'll come back to Helen. In 2021, instead of hiring a title attorney, which is what you hire when you intend to develop a piece of ground and you are not certain who owns it, Patricia hired what she called a title research consultant. That consultant was her brother, Greg Cordell. Greg had a printer and a Hotmail account. Greg was not a licensed attorney. Greg was not a licensed surveyor. Greg was not licensed for anything. Greg's report to the HOA board was 3 pages, contained one Google Maps screenshot, and concluded, and I am quoting from the document I obtained later under a public records request, "Title appears unclear. Parcel may be abandoned." Patricia presented Greg's 3 pages to the board as a professional title opinion. The board voted to proceed with planning. I got my first certified letter from the HOA in February 2022. The letter was on Whitestone Ridge HOA letterhead. It was signed by Patricia. It informed me that the HOA intended to reclaim and develop the adjacent common ground as part of a community improvement project, and that I had 30 days to vacate any personal items or markers on the parcel. I read that letter sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. I read it twice. Then I went into my study, pulled my father's old recorded deed out of the fire safe, pulled the 1971 Whitaker survey out with it, made clean photocopies, drove to the post office that afternoon, and mailed Patricia a certified packet of my own, a formal written response, a copy of the deed, a copy of the survey, a polite cease and desist on plain letterhead, no firm name, no theatrics, 2 sentences at the bottom that I remember verbatim. The parcel in question is privately held by the undersigned, recorded with the county since 1971, and is not part of the Whitestone Ridge subdivision. Any attempt to develop, mark, fence, or claim this land will be defended through every available legal channel. I signed it. I sent it certified, return receipt requested. 8 days later, the green return receipt card came back to my mailbox. Patricia had signed for it, her own loopy P, her own loopy C. I waited. Nothing happened on the parcel. No bulldozers, no surveyors, no flagging tape. I almost let myself believe she'd read the deed, called a real attorney, and quietly walked it back. People do sometimes, when they realize the ground under them isn't theirs. She had not walked it back. She had thrown my packet in a kitchen drawer. I know this because she said so under oath, 18 months later, in a deposition I will get to. She told her own attorney's questioner, "I assumed it was a scam. We get a lot of mail. I didn't bother the board with it." She didn't bother the board with the second one either, or the third, or the fourth. Over the next 24 months, I mailed her 11 certified packets in total. Each one contained the deed, the survey, and an escalating written objection. Each one came back with her signature on the green card. Each one ended up, I would later learn, in the same kitchen drawer. At HOA meetings during that same period, residents occasionally asked about the Common Ground project. Patricia told them, on the record, in minutes I read later, "The title issue has been fully resolved by our consultant. There is nothing further to discuss." In April 2024, the board approved a $40 million construction loan from a regional bank. By the time the resort was finished, it would balloon past 80. Patricia appointed her son-in-law's contracting company as the general contractor. No competitive bid. The board minutes record that vote in 2 sentences. The board minutes do not record anyone asking why a $40 million build, with a title question hanging over it, was getting awarded without a single rival quote. Construction started on my parcel on the 3rd Monday in May. I drove out there the morning the first bulldozer arrived. I sat on the county road in my truck, 200 yards from the access point, and I watched a tracked excavator the size of a small house roll down my father's dirt drive. I watched a kid in a hard hat tie pink flagging tape around the white oak my father had planted. I watched another kid put a chainsaw to it. I did not move. I did not get out. I did not call the sheriff. I did not call my old firm. I want to tell you that was strategy, and most of it was. But part of it was something else, and I want to be honest about it. I'd spent 31 years practicing land use and property law in this state. I had argued an accession case at the appellate level. I knew, sitting in that truck, watching a chainsaw take down my father's oak, that the bigger they built, the bigger the number got. Accession doctrine in this state is older than the state itself. Whatever you build on land that isn't yours becomes the property of the landowner upon completion. It doesn't matter if you built it in good faith. It doesn't matter if you spent $80 million. The dirt wins. The dirt always wins. So I let them build. I drove past the trucks of imported Italian marble in June. I drove past the spa tile pallets in August. I drove past the landscaping crews planting boxwood hedges on what was, by then, a kidney-shaped pool on top of my father's oak. Every load made the column on my legal pad longer. Every invoice they processed through that no-bid contract made the eventual number bigger. Patricia thought she was building a resort. She was building my retirement. I went back 1 week after the ribbon. Not onto the parcel. I knew better than that. Going inside the chain would have given Patricia the one thing she still needed, which was a clean photograph of me trespassing on what she was telling everyone was hers. I parked the truck on the gravel shoulder of the county road, 8 feet outside her gate, on undisputed public right-of-way. I leaned against the hood. I held up my phone and started filming. I wasn't filming her. I was filming the supply trucks. A refrigerated catering van, a linen service, a pool chemical delivery, a landscaper trailer, license plate, timestamp, company name on the door, one after another, all rolling through the yellow chain Patricia's security guard now unhooked and rehooked like a doorman. Every truck that crossed onto my dirt road was a vendor I would name later. I wasn't sure yet which I'd use. I just wanted them on the record. I had been there maybe 40 minutes when the golf cart came down the drive. Patricia was in the passenger seat. Mark Trenton was driving, the HOA vice president, a retired insurance broker with a comb-over and a face that looked permanently sunburned. Lisa Park, the secretary, sat behind them with her iPad already open, already recording. Patricia was holding a manila envelope. The cart stopped on the gravel 6 feet from my truck. Patricia stepped out without saying hello. "You've been warned," she said. She held the envelope out toward me like a summons. "Take it." I didn't take it. I let her hold it in the air between us for an uncomfortable second. Then I gestured at the hood of my truck. She set it down on the hood instead. She didn't like that, but she did it. I opened the envelope while she watched. Inside was a single sheet on the new resort letterhead. The same letterhead I'd seen on the members-only sign, gold embossed, very pretty. Across the top, notice of trespass and harassment. Below, in bold, fine assessed, $5,000. And below that, in a font Patricia had clearly picked herself, subsequent violations will result in a lien against your primary residence at my home address. She had printed my home address on the notice. I read it twice. I looked up at her. "You can't put a lien on my home," I said. "That's not how liens work. That's not how HOAs work. That's not how any of this works. Our attorney says we can." "Then your attorney is wrong, or you didn't ask one." Mark leaned out of the cart. "We've already filed with the county to formally absorb your parcel into the HOA boundaries. Once that process is through, whatever you think you have, deed, paperwork, whatever, disappears. Saves us all a lot of trouble if you just walk away now." I looked at Mark for a long second. "Filed with the county." He said it the way someone says it who has never read a county filing in his life. I didn't correct him. I noted it. I noted the exact wording. I noted that Lisa was recording on the iPad, which meant his statement was time-stamped on a device the HOA owned. Mark had just put a confidently wrong claim about a public records filing on the HOA's own recording, in front of the HOA secretary, while standing on a public road outside the parcel he was lying about. I was going to be using that recording. I just didn't know yet whether I'd get it through discovery or whether Lisa would hand it to me herself. A supply truck rolled past us, a flatbed loaded with patio furniture. The driver was going faster than he should have. Whether he caught a rut or whether he angled the trailer on purpose, I will never know for certain. But the rear corner of the trailer swung wide as he straightened out, and one of the chairs in the top row tipped loose and came off the back of the load. It hit the side of my truck. The chair was a stainless antique lounger, and it left a deep dent in the door under the driver's window. The chair clattered into the gravel. The truck slowed for maybe 3 seconds, then kept going. Patricia smiled. She actually smiled. She said, very pleasantly, "Park somewhere else next time, sir." Mark laughed. Lisa snorted on the iPad's microphone. I heard it through the speaker because she had the volume up. I looked at the dent. Then I looked at the chair lying in the gravel. Then I looked at Patricia. I didn't yell. I didn't move toward her. I didn't even raise my voice. I said, "I'd like the truck plate, please, and the company name, for my insurance." "You're welcome to ask the driver," Patricia said, "next time he comes back, through our gate." She got back in the cart. Mark turned it around. Lisa kept the iPad pointed at me until they were back at the chain. I stood on the gravel shoulder of a public county road, looking at a dented truck and a stainless antique lounger that the resort would later list as an inventory loss, and I thought about how long it had been since I'd done a deposition. I picked up the chair. I set it carefully on the shoulder, away from traffic. I walked to the bed of my truck and pulled out a notebook, a plain spiral, 98 cents at a gas station. No firm letterhead, no logo. I wrote down, flatbed delivery, white Peterbilt, plate AVC 7741, 10:47 a.m., chair detached from load and struck vehicle, no driver stop. Patricia Cordell statement, park somewhere else next time, sir. Mark Trenton statement, we've already filed with the county to formally absorb your parcel into the HOA boundaries. Lisa Park recording on HOA-issued iPad, audible at 6 feet. I closed the notebook. I drove the 8 miles home. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour without opening anything. You spend 3 decades in property law and you learn one thing about people like Patricia Cordell. They don't go down because somebody outsmarts them. They go down because they keep talking. They keep filing. They keep handing you receipts. The most dangerous thing you can do when somebody like Patricia is in the middle of digging her own hole is interrupt her. So I didn't interrupt. I let her dig. I made myself a cup of coffee. I pulled out the manila folder from the glove compartment, the one with the 11 green return receipt cards. I added one more sheet to it, the notice of trespass and harassment with the $5,000 fine and my home address printed on it. Then I opened my laptop, opened a clean new document, and started drafting a letter to the county clerk, requesting copies of every filing the Whitestone Ridge HOA had submitted in the last 36 months relating to common area expansion or parcel reclassification. Public records, no subpoena required, $20 processing fee. She had handed me a $5,000 fine for standing on a public road outside my own land. By the time I got home, I'd already drafted the letter that would cost her family everything. The note showed up in my mailbox on a Thursday, hand-delivered, no postage. Sir, I've lived in Whitestone for 19 years. What they're doing isn't right. Call me. Helen Marsh, Lot 42. I called Helen that afternoon. She suggested coffee at the diner on the county road, the one outside the HOA's gate, the one Patricia wouldn't be caught dead in because the booths were vinyl and the coffee was $1.50. Helen Marsh was 64, retired paralegal, 28 years at a mid-size firm in the city before she moved out to Whitestone with her late husband. She came to the booth with a folder of her own. She set it down across from my coffee cup and said, "I've been watching her for 4 years. I started writing things down 2 years ago. I just didn't have anyone to give the notes to." She slid the folder across. Inside were screenshots of HOA Facebook posts Patricia had since deleted. Inside were photographs Helen had taken from her own front porch, time-stamped, of supply trucks rolling past at hours that violated the HOA's own noise ordinance. The same ordinance Patricia had fined 3 other residents under, including Helen, in the same period. Inside was a typed list of every HOA meeting Helen had attended in 3 years. With the date Patricia had said the words, "The title issue has been fully resolved by our consultant," highlighted in yellow on 5 separate occasions. I looked up at Helen. Helen looked back at me with the calm of a woman who had filed exhibits for a living. "I made an audio recording of the August 2023 meeting," she said. "One-party consent state. I was a party. I checked the statute. It's clean. I have worked with a lot of paralegals in 31 years. Helen was the best one I had ever sat across a table from, and she had never worked in property. She introduced me to 2 more residents that week. Gabriel Ortiz, retired civil engineer, had pulled the resort's submitted site plan off the county's public portal and noticed that the parcel boundaries on the HOA's filing didn't match the boundaries on the recorded subdivision plat. They extended 43 feet past the southern fence line into what was, on every county map ever filed, mine. Tom Whitley worked part-time at the community mailroom. Tom had personally watched Patricia sign for 3 of my 11 certified packets, walk out of the mailroom, slit the envelopes open over the recycling bin, and toss the contents in without reading them. I asked Tom if he'd be willing to put that in a sworn statement. He said, "I was waiting for somebody to ask." The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. I want to be honest about what I was looking for, because the audience deserves to know it wasn't a fishing trip. I knew exactly what was on file because I had filed half of it myself, or my father had. I pulled my own recorded deed, clean, page and book number, recorded the week of my father's funeral. I pulled my father's 1971 deed, clean, the original ink darker than mine. I pulled 22 years of property tax payment records under my name and social. Every November, paid on time, never delinquent. I pulled the 1994 platted boundaries of the Whitestone Ridge subdivision. The platted line stopped exactly where the recorded survey said it stopped, 320 feet north of my parcel's southern fence. Then I pulled the HOA's recent filing, the one Mark Trenton had told me, on the gravel shoulder of the county road 8 days earlier, had already been filed with the county to formally absorb your parcel into the HOA boundaries. The HOA's filing was there, stamped, received. It was also stamped, in red, on a separate sheet stapled to the front. Rejected, insufficient supporting documentation, no action taken, resubmit with recorded title chain. The rejection was dated 4 months before Mark Trenton stood on the gravel and told me my deed was about to disappear. I asked the clerk for a certified copy of the rejection notice. She charged me $3. She handed it to me across the counter in a manila sleeve. I thanked her. I walked out to my truck. I sat in the parking lot for a minute, just looking at the seal. $3. That's what it cost to convert Mark Trenton's confident lie into a piece of paper. While I was in there, I ran one more check because it had been bothering me. I asked the clerk if she could look up a Gregory Cordell against the State Bar Registry. She did it on her terminal. No match. I asked her to look up Gregory Cordell against the State Surveyor Licensing Board. No match. I asked her to look up Gregory Cordell against the State Real Estate Broker Registry. No match. Greg Cordell, the title research consultant whose 3-page Google Maps report had been presented to 148 household HOA as a professional title opinion, was not licensed in this state for any profession that touched land. I drove home and called Helen. "Bring Gabriel and Tom to my house Saturday morning," I said. "We need to talk about what comes next." Saturday, the 4 of us sat at my kitchen table with the manila folder from my glove compartment, Helen's folder, Gabriel's surveyor markups, Tom's handwritten statement, the county rejection sheet, and a fresh legal pad. I walked them through what we had. I tried to keep it short. "The doctrine here," I said to Helen, "is called accession. It's a property law principle. It's older than this state, the simple version. If you build something on land that isn't yours, the law doesn't make you take it down. The law gives the building to the person who owns the dirt under it. Doesn't matter if you built it in good faith. Doesn't matter what you spent." Helen looked at me for a long second. "So they built you a resort. They built me a retirement." Gabriel laughed once, surprised, and then stopped laughing. Tom didn't laugh. Tom looked at the manila folder and said quietly, "I watched her sign those receipts, all 3 of them. She knew." That was the moment I made the call about evidence discipline. I had been a litigator long enough to know what happens to a clean case when you overstack it. You pile in 15 exhibits and a jury, or worse, a judge, starts treating each one as 10% of the proof, instead of treating one of them as 100%. So I picked. The main weapon was the deed. One piece of paper, clean chain of title back to 1971, 22 years of taxes paid. Anyone in the room could understand it in a single sentence. He owns the dirt. They built on the dirt. Around it, I kept 4 supporting receipts, no more. Helen's August 2023 audio, Patricia, on record, telling her own board the title issue was resolved when she had 11 of my certified packets in her kitchen drawer. Lisa Park's actual meeting minutes, pulled from the community portal, showing Patricia's verbal claims to the board, did not match what was minuted, which meant Patricia had been editing reality between speech and paper. Tom's eyewitness affidavit, Patricia signing, walking, slitting, discarding. 3 packets, 3 witnessed events, a pattern. The county clerk's rejection of the HOA's common area filing, stamped in red, Mark Trenton's lie reduced to $3 and a certified seal. That was it. The deed and 4 supports. I closed the folder. "What about the 11 certified receipts?" Helen asked. "Aren't those a 6th? "The 11 receipts," I said, "are part of the main weapon. They prove she had actual notice. They're the spine of the deed claim, not a separate exhibit." Helen nodded slowly. Gabriel said, "What about Greg Cordell?" "Greg Cordell," I said, "is a piece of evidence I'm not going to file. I'm going to mention him exactly once, in court, after the judge has already ruled the deed valid. He's the punchline, not the case." Helen smiled, and it was the first smile I had seen her wear in the diner or the kitchen. "You've done this before." "A few times." I didn't tell them how many. I didn't tell them which firm. I didn't tell them about the appellate brief I'd co-authored, that any judge in this state who had ever ruled on accession would have read. They'd find out soon enough. So would Patricia. I drove the 3 of them home that afternoon. I came back to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and started drafting the formal cease and desist that would go out on Monday morning on a real attorney's letterhead. 22 years of property work had taught me one thing. You don't fight the loud people in their courtroom. You build a quiet file, and you wait until the courtroom is theirs to lose. The cease and desist went out Monday morning on the letterhead of my old firm, Holloway and Reese, signed by a junior partner named Adrian, who had been a summer associate of mine in 2009. Patricia received it Wednesday. She signed for it personally. I knew because Tom Whitley watched her do it at the community mailroom, and Tom texted me a single line. She read this one. I gave her 21 days to vacate the parcel, halt resort operations, and return to status quo. I expected her to call her attorney, sit with a real one for the first time in 3 years, and quietly request a settlement conversation. She did the opposite. 8 days after she signed for my letter, a courier delivered a response to my home address on the letterhead of a firm I'll call Bramwell Hayes, a mid-tier litigation shop 2 counties over with a reputation for billable aggression and weak research. I had cross-examined 2 of their associates in the past. They were the kind of firm Patricia would hire because the website looked expensive. The response letter was 4 pages. It opened with the line, "Your client's claim is wholly meritless and will be defended vigorously." It went downhill from there. The Bramwell Hayes letter informed me that the Whitestone Ridge HOA would be filing, within 30 days, a quiet title action against me to formally establish the HOA's ownership of the parcel. It would simultaneously be filing an adverse possession claim covering the relevant period, and it would be filing a separate civil suit against me personally for tortious interference with an $80 million development project, with damages sought in excess of $22 million, plus a lien against my personal residence pending resolution. $22 million. Against me, personally, because I had asked them to leave my land. Adverse possession is a legal trick someone uses when they want to claim land they've occupied openly for years. Quiet title is the court motion that locks it in. Patricia's lawyer was trying to use both at once. Both only work if my deed isn't real, or if I never objected. Mine was. I had, 11 times, certified, signed for. The Bramwell Hayes letter, written by a man who clearly had not seen my file, was the first piece of legal paper in this entire matter that I genuinely enjoyed reading. I forwarded it to Adrian with 3 words at the top, "Start the complaint." Then Patricia did the thing that ended her. That same evening, Wednesday, August 14th, around 9:47 p.m., I have the timestamps. Patricia posted in 4 separate Facebook community groups. 2 were Whitestone internal. 2 were broader, the Regional Neighborhood Watch Group and the county's local buy/sell/trade page, which had 11,000 members. I have the screenshots. I have them 4 ways: my own, Helen's, Tom's, and an archived web capture pulled by a paralegal at Adrian's firm within 90 minutes of the posts going live. The post read, in part, "PSA to all Whitestone neighbors and the surrounding community. There is a man going around harassing our residents and falsely claiming our beautiful new resort belongs to him. He has been seen filming our supply trucks and threatening our board members. We are pursuing him through every legal channel for over $22 million in damages. His name is my full name. He lives at my full home address. He drives a dark green 2009 Ford pickup, plate AVC 7741. If you see him on or near our property, please call our security line immediately. Do not engage. She named me. She listed my street. She listed my plate. Helen called me at 10:14 p.m. I have that timestamp too, because Helen is the kind of person who notes the time when she calls you about something serious. She just doxed you in 4 groups, Helen said. Her voice was tight. I know, I said. I just saved them. Helen exhaled. You're not going to like the comments. I scrolled. She was right. About a third of the comments were from Whitestone residents I had never met, defending Patricia. We love our resort. This man is harassing us. Lock him up. Another third were from county residents who had no idea what was going on and were doing the thing people do on the internet, which is pick a team based on the loudest voice in the post. The last third were from Helen, Gabriel, Tom, and 3 other Whitestone residents I would later learn had been quietly waiting for permission to push back. Helen's comment was 4 words: read the recorded deed. It got 11 likes before Patricia deleted it. She didn't delete the post, she deleted the comment. That was the other timestamp I would later need. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time that night, scrolling through the screenshots. I had spent 3 decades watching plaintiffs lose cases because their lawyers wouldn't let them stay quiet. I had watched defendants destroy themselves on Facebook a dozen times in the last 5 years alone. There was a rule, an unwritten one, that the second any pending litigation showed up in a public post with a named individual and a damages figure attached, the case had transformed. It was no longer just about the underlying dispute. It was now about defamation, about tortious interference with the named individual's livelihood and reputation, about emotional distress. Patricia had not filed her quiet title action yet. She had not filed her adverse possession claim yet. She had not filed her $22 million civil suit yet. But she had now publicly published, in writing with timestamps, to roughly 15,000 readers, attached to my full legal name and home address, every allegation she intended to file, framed as factual statements. She had handed me 3 more lawsuits inside one Facebook post. The next 2 days were the hardest of the whole story, and the audience deserves them honestly. On Thursday morning, a woman I'd never seen before pulled into the gas station I always stopped at on the way back from town. She looked at my truck. She looked at my plate. She looked at me. She walked into the store, paid for her coffee, walked out, sat in her car, and called somebody on her phone while watching me through her windshield. I didn't react. I went home. On Thursday afternoon, a man at the hardware store, a man I had been buying lumber from for 14 years, looked at me a beat too long across the register. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He had clearly seen the post. On Thursday night, somebody drove past my house slowly, twice, with their phone up. The doxing was working. For about 48 hours, in pockets of the county, I was the man from the Facebook post, the man who was harassing the lovely Whitestone HOA, the man who was being sued for $22 million. That was the cost of letting Patricia dig. I made myself sit with it. I poured a coffee at the kitchen table. I opened the manila folder, now thicker than it had been a month ago. I added the 4 Facebook screenshots with their timestamps. I added the Bramwell Hayes response letter. I added a printed copy of Helen's deleted comment with the recorded deletion time. I added a note about the woman at the gas station. Then I opened my laptop and started the document I'd been waiting 22 years to file. Caption: Daniel Holloway versus Whitestone Ridge HOA. Patricia Cordell, individually. Mark Trenton, individually. Lisa Park, individually. Causes of action, in the order I drafted them. Declaratory judgment, confirming title. Claim of accession to all improvements upon the parcel. Defamation per se. Tortious interference. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Treble damages for bad faith development. I gave myself 1 week. Patricia called the emergency open meeting 6 days after the Facebook post. Helen forwarded me the notice the morning it went out. Subject line: Urgent community meeting. Legal update on resort and hostel claimant. Body: Patricia's personal sign-off, attached PDF, live stream link to the HOA's Facebook page, doors open at 6:30 p.m. Wednesday, refreshments served, bring your questions. She's going to introduce her attorney, Helen said. She wants the community to watch her file the lawsuit. Good, I said. The clubhouse sat on the resort grounds. Wooden beams, vaulted ceiling, a chandelier made from antlers Patricia had told the board would evoke alpine elegance. There were 112 folding chairs set up. By 6:45, every chair was full, and another 30 residents were standing along the back wall. The Facebook live stream was running off a tripod near the podium. Patricia had instructed the kid running it to keep the camera tight on her. I came in late and sat in the very last row, in the same canvas jacket from the gravel shoulder. Helen sat in the back too, 3 chairs over. Gabriel was on the side aisle. Tom was near the door. Adrian sat next to me with a thin folder on her lap. A few people noticed me, most didn't. The ones who did whispered to the ones who didn't. One of them whispered something to Patricia at the podium, and Patricia smiled wider. She opened with her own warmth. Thank you all for coming on short notice. As many of you have seen, we've been forced into action against an individual who has been harassing our community and falsely claiming our resort sits on his property. Tonight we want to be fully transparent with you about the legal steps we are taking on behalf of every Whitestone homeowner. Applause. Real applause from real residents who genuinely believed her. To explain those steps, I'd like to introduce our legal counsel from Bramwell Hayes, Mr. Daniel Voss. A man in a navy suit stood up and walked to the podium. He was confident. He hadn't read my file. He was about to find out he hadn't read my file in front of his client, on a live stream, in a room with 142 witnesses. Voss laid out Patricia's case the way Patricia had told him to lay it out. The HOA had developed the parcel openly for over 2 years. The owner of record had filed no recorded objection and taken no legal action. The HOA's adverse possession claim was strong. The HOA's quiet title action was procedural. The HOA's civil suit against the claimant, me, sought $22 million in damages plus lien against my residence. He said all of it in the calm voice of a man billing $400 an hour to read a script. The room applauded again. Patricia, glowing, scanned the audience. She found me in the back row. She smiled the way she had smiled at the dent in my truck. "Sir," she said, into the microphone, voice carrying to every speaker in the room, "would you like to address the community before we file? Last chance." 142 heads turned. I stood up. Adrian stood with me. We walked down the center aisle. I was holding nothing but a single thin folder, unopened. Patricia made room at the podium, the way you make room for someone you've already beaten. I set the folder down. I did not open it. I turned not to Patricia, but to Daniel Voss. "Counselor," I said, "I just have 3 questions for you. May I?" Voss glanced at Patricia. Patricia, glowing, nodded. Let him hang himself in front of everyone. "Proceed," Voss said. I kept my hands on the folder. I did not raise my voice. Question 1. Can adverse possession be established against an owner of record who has paid every property tax bill on the parcel for 22 consecutive years? The room had been a low rumble of side conversation. It stopped. Voss opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Patricia. He looked back at me. "No," he said, "not typically." "Not at all," I said gently. "Not in this state." Question 2. Can adverse possession be established when the owner of record has sent the claimant 11 certified mail objections, each of which the claimant personally signed for? Voss did not answer immediately. The live stream camera kept rolling. Patricia's smile started to do something complicated around the corners. "No," Voss said again, quieter this time. Then question 3. I turned slightly toward Patricia. I did not look at her directly. I kept my eyes on Voss, because Voss was the one who knew what I was about to say before I said it. "Can you explain to your client why she is about to lose her family's home?" The room was silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the camera on the tripod cycling. Patricia's voice, pitched higher than before, the polish coming off, said, How dare you? Who do you think you are?" I didn't answer her. I reached into the inside pocket of my canvas jacket and pulled out a single business card. Cream stock, embossed lettering, the firm name on top in serif type. I slid it across the podium to Daniel Voss. Voss read it. I watched his face do the small mechanical thing a lawyer's face does when he realizes the file he didn't read is the file he should have read. His shoulders dropped about an inch. He picked the card up between his thumb and forefinger like it might bite him. He looked at Patricia for a full second without speaking. Then he leaned to her, hand cupped over the microphone, and said, quietly enough that the room couldn't quite catch it, but loudly enough that the front row could. "Patricia, can we step outside? Now." He turned to the room. "We're taking a brief recess." He walked off the podium. He walked off the stage. He walked out of the clubhouse, with Patricia trailing behind him in the white sandals, the live stream camera still rolling, the audience still seated, the antler chandelier still hanging. Helen, from the back row, did not stand up. She did not need to. I picked the folder up off the podium without opening it. Adrian and I walked back up the center aisle. Nobody said anything. Someone in the third row coughed. Tom held the door open for us on the way out. In the parking lot, Adrian let out a breath she had clearly been holding for 10 minutes. "He didn't even look in the folder," she said. "He didn't need to," I said. He looked at the card. Patricia and Voss were standing near her white Cadillac, 20 yards from us. Voss was talking. Patricia was not. Voss was using both hands. Patricia was holding the business card now. Voss had apparently given it to her, and her face was doing the thing faces do when the floor under them stops being solid. I got in my truck. Adrian got in her own car. We left. She didn't look at the card again until she was alone. She didn't ask me a single question that night. She thought she'd just watched me embarrass myself in front of her community. She had 7 days left before the papers I'd already filed showed up on her doorstep. The certified envelope showed up at Patricia's front door on a Tuesday morning. She signed for it personally. She did not slit it open over a recycling bin. Tom told me later she stood in her driveway in her bathrobe and read the first page twice before she walked back inside. Inside the envelope, a 47-page verified complaint, filed the previous Friday in County Circuit Court, captioned Daniel Holloway versus Whitestone Ridge HOA, Patricia Cordell individually, Mark Trenton individually, Lisa Park individually. 6 causes of action, damages stated, preliminary hearing scheduled for the following Wednesday. 6 business days later, we walked into the courthouse. The courtroom was small, pine paneling, 10 rows of public seating, a single bench, no jury box because this was a preliminary on declaratory judgment. Adrian and I sat at plaintiff's table. Helen, Gabriel, and Tom sat in the front row of the gallery. Behind them, scattered across the public seats, were maybe 15 Whitestone residents, most of them people who had clapped for Patricia at the clubhouse, and were now there because Helen had quietly told them they ought to see this. Patricia, Mark, and Lisa sat at defense table. Daniel Voss sat between them. He had a fresh manila folder in front of him this time. He had clearly read it. The HOA Facebook live stream was not running. Patricia had not been told it was a public hearing. She had assumed, because Voss had told her, that the deed question would be handled in chambers. It would not be handled in chambers. The judge, Judge Margaret Ellis, 26 years on this bench, a woman my old firm had appeared in front of 40 or 50 times, came in at 9 sharp. She nodded to the bailiff. She sat down. She opened the file. She looked across the well of the courtroom at Daniel Voss. "Counsel for the defendant, I have one threshold question. Do you dispute the authenticity of the recorded deed in Plaintiff's Exhibit 1? Voss stood. He cleared his throat. "We do not, Your Honor." "You do not dispute the 1971 chain of title?" "We do not." "You do not dispute that the plaintiff has paid the property tax on the parcel for 22 consecutive years?" "We do not." "Then we have a clean chain of title, undisputed. The parcel belongs to Mr. Holloway. That is settled on the record." Adrian stood, formally entered the deed into evidence, and sat back down. The whole exchange took 90 seconds. There was no objection. There was no theater. 22 years of taxes and 1 recorded deed had ended the only question that mattered, and the courtroom had not even warmed up yet. Patricia leaned to Voss and whispered something sharp. Voss did not turn his head. Adrian stood again. Your Honor, with the title question resolved, plaintiff respectfully moves to enter 4 supporting exhibits to demonstrate the defendant's actual knowledge and bad faith conduct. Proceed. Adrian held up the first. 11 certified mail return receipts, dated 2022 through 2024, each one signed personally by Mrs. Cordell. She did not narrate the receipts. She set them on the bench. Judge Ellis flipped through. She paused on the 3rd receipt, the 5th, the 8th. She looked up at Patricia for a beat. She set them down. Patricia's color was not good. Exhibit B, Adrian said, audio recording of the August 2023 HOA board meeting. On this recording, Mrs. Cordell informs her own board, quote, the title issue has been fully resolved by our consultant. She had at that point signed for 9 of the certified packets. She did not play the audio. She entered the transcript. Judge Ellis read 3 lines. She did not look up this time. She set it down. Helen, in the front row of the gallery, was sitting perfectly still. Exhibit C, sworn affidavit of Thomas Whitley, mailroom employee at the Whitestone Ridge Community Mailroom. Mr. Whitley witnessed Mrs. Cordell sign for, walk out with, and discard the contents of 3 of the certified packets without reading them. Mark Trenton turned his head very slightly toward Patricia. Lisa Park did not move at all. Lisa was looking at her own hands. Exhibit D, Adrian paused. Certified copy of the Whitestone Ridge HOA's Common Area Expansion filing with the County Recorder's Office, dated 4 months prior to the verbal claim by Mr. Mark Trenton on a public road that the filing had been processed and would absorb the plaintiff's parcel. The filing was, in fact, rejected, stamped rejected, insufficient supporting documentation on the date shown. Mr. Trenton's representation to the plaintiff was, as a matter of public record, false. Mark's face changed. The retired insurance broker who had laughed at the chair denting my truck was now, for the first time, realizing what individual liability meant. Adrian sat down. 4 exhibits, no more. Judge Ellis nodded once. Counsel for the defense, do you wish to be heard? Voss stood. He started to speak. He stopped. He turned to Patricia and said quietly, Your Honor, we'd like to discuss settlement. On what timeline, Counselor? Now, if the court permits. You have 15 minutes. Patricia was already on her feet, mouth open. Voss put a hand on her elbow and steered her, not gently, out the side door. Mark followed. Lisa stayed in her chair for a beat, looking at her hands, then stood and walked out alone. I did not move. Helen, 2 rows behind me, exhaled. Gabriel exhaled. Tom did not exhale, because Tom had not been breathing visibly the entire hearing. 15 minutes later they came back. Voss did not sit. He addressed the bench standing. Your Honor, the defendants are prepared to discuss transfer of the constructed improvements to the plaintiff in exchange for a structured payment, plus damages. Judge Ellis looked at Adrian. Adrian stood. Your Honor, under this state's long-established doctrine of accession, affirmed at the appellate level in Kerrigan v. Whitfield Trust, an opinion this court is familiar with, improvements made upon the land of another, whether in good faith or bad, vest in the landowner upon completion. The Whitestone Ridge Wellness Resort, the clubhouse, the cabins, the pools, the spa, all permitted improvements completed on my client's parcel, therefore belongs to my client as a matter of law. She paused. My client is not seeking demolition. He is seeking confirmation of title to the improvements, plus damages. The fair market value of the completed resort as a luxury hospitality asset, plus brand value, plus projected 10-year revenue, plus damages for defamation per se, tortious interference, and bad faith development, totals $1.4 billion. The room did the thing rooms do. Patricia made a small sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when a number lands on their chest. Judge Ellis did not look at Patricia. She looked at Voss. Counselor, your client built an $80 million resort on land she did not own, after receiving 11 certified objections she personally signed for, while telling her own board the title was clear. Under accession in this state, she does not own a single tile of what she built. She owes the plaintiff every inch she poured. Do you contest the doctrine? Voss closed his eyes for half a second. "We do not, Your Honor." Behind me, Adrian whispered, almost to herself, "There it is." Patricia's voice, smaller than I had ever heard it. You can't just take our resort." The judge did not even turn her head. "Ma'am, under this state's accession doctrine, you built it on his land. You don't own a single tile of it." Patricia sat down hard. She did not sit. She arrived in the chair. Mark put a hand to his forehead. Lisa, still looking at her own hands, was already mouthing the words individually named. I watched her do it. I had not spoken once. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Holloway, anything you wish to add to the record before we discuss the schedule for the settlement conference?" I stood. I kept my voice quiet because the room did not need volume. "Only one thing, Your Honor. For 31 years I practiced land use and property law in this state. I co-authored the appellate brief in Kerrigan versus Whitfield Trust, the opinion my co-counsel just cited. I tried to tell Mrs. Cordell what the law was, 11 times. She signed for every one of them." I sat down. Patricia's face, the face that had smiled at the dent in my truck, the face that had said, "Park somewhere else next time, sir," the face that had glowed under the antler chandelier, finally broke. Not theatrically, quietly, the way a wall breaks when the floor under it is gone. Behind Voss, audible to the front row of the gallery, came his voice, half-whispered, half-spoken, to Patricia for the last time as her attorney. "We told you to verify the title." Helen, in the front row, finally allowed herself to cry, just once. She wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand and kept her eyes on the bench. Gabriel reached over without looking and squeezed her wrist. Judge Ellis closed the file. "We'll set a settlement conference for 2 weeks from Friday. Court is adjourned." The bailiff said the words. Everyone stood. I gathered my legal pad. Adrian squeezed my shoulder. I walked out of the courtroom past Patricia Cordell, and Patricia Cordell did not look up. The settlement was signed 90 days later. $1.4 billion, title to the resort transferred to me. Clubhouse, cabins, pools, spa, brand, every key card behind that yellow chain. Patricia was personally named and settled separately for $400,000 from her own assets. The HOA's quiet title action was dismissed with prejudice. The county district attorney's office opened a fraud probe into Greg Cordell's 3-page consultant report and the rejected common area filing. Greg was indicted on document fraud the following spring. To cover the settlement gap, the HOA imposed a $14,000 special assessment on every residence. The neighborhood revolted. Patricia's son-in-law's contracting company folded inside of 6 weeks. Patricia filed personal bankruptcy in November. The white Cadillac was auctioned in the spring. I kept the resort, leased it to a mid-tier hotel chain on a 30-year ground lease, and walked away from operations. Helen joked I was now Patricia's biggest tenant, except Patricia wasn't a tenant anymore. I quietly set up an irrevocable trust that paid the HOA dues in perpetuity for Helen, Gabriel, Tom, and 3 other residents who had never sold me out. They found out from a confused HOA clerk 3 months later. Helen called and cussed me out for 12 minutes. I let her. Whitestone Ridge held emergency board elections in October. Helen ran on 3 words: transparency, term limits, verified title. She won 6-1. The new board's first official act, unanimous, was to bar Patricia Cordell from speaking at any community meeting. The Facebook posts were community deleted. The antler chandelier came down. Local news ran the story under one headline: HOA built $80 million resort on private land. Owner walks away with $1.4 billion. For 3 counties, Cordell became shorthand for what happens when an HOA forgets it isn't a government. I didn't move. I didn't buy a yacht. I spent the rest of that summer on the porch my father built. In late September, I drove out to the South Gate one more time. The yellow chain was gone. The members-only sign was gone. The guardhouse had been hauled off on a flatbed. Where the chain had stretched across the road on opening day, there was now a plain wooden marker my father had carved by hand in 1971, restored and replanted on the same dirt. On the buffer strip behind it, I planted 12 young white oaks, one for every certified letter Patricia had signed and thrown in a drawer. I kept one segment of the yellow chain. It's framed on the wall of my home office, next to the recorded deed. Patricia thought she had built a resort. What she built was the most expensive lesson her county had ever paid for. I didn't destroy it. I didn't have to. The law had been on my side the whole time. She just couldn't be bothered to read it.